The last war Corvair is still rising from the ashes of the last war. The consequences of a century of conflict can't be offset with a single treaty. The last war didn't end because people resolved their differences, and it didn't end with a victor. It ended when the morning destroyed Sire, because people were afraid that the war itself was the cause of that cataclysm, and that continuing the struggle could doom them all. Many are sick of the endless conflict and embrace the peace, but just as many yearn to finish what their ancestors started, and others see potential profit for themselves in war. Some leaders focus on healing the lingering wounds of the conflict, while others work to ensure that their people will have an edge when fighting begins anew. The last war is one of the primary themes of Eberron. When developing an adventure in Corvair, consider how the lingering impact of the war could affect the story. Some element of the war could drive the entire adventure. The heroes could be tasked with recovering a relic lost in the war, or capturing a fugitive war criminal. But it can also be a background note that simply adds flavor to a story. If the adventure features a group of bandits, perhaps they're deserters, which can be all the more interesting if they once served in the army of the same nation as one of the player characters. This section looks at the different ways that the last war can influence an adventure. Personal impact. As players develop characters in an Eberron campaign, you can work with them to determine the role that the war played in their background. Here are a few topics for conversation. Military service. Did the character fight in the war? If so, which nation did they serve and what role did they fill? If more than one of the characters fought in the war, did they serve together, or as allies, or fight on opposing sides? Military service can be the basis of a strong connection for two or more characters. Civilian life. If the character is from one of the 5 nations and didn't fight in the war, how and why did they remain on the sidelines? Did they oppose the war? Did they do something to avoid conscription? Or was there a reason they were considered unsuitable for service? Personal loss. What did the characters lose during the war? Did members of their family die? And if so, how? Was the village they grew up in destroyed? And if so, who was responsible? If the characters are from Sire, they have lost their nation. Do they have any loved ones left? Did they spend time in a refugee camp or in the outpost of New Sire in Breland? Do they support Prince Orjev as the leader of Sire, or do they have other ideas for the nation's future? For example, when an Onderan player character meets a group of Eldeen druids, it's an opportunity to exploit the bad blood between Onder and the Eldeen reaches, and to determine if this interaction has any personal relevance to the character. If a player character has the soldier background, you can introduce an NPC as a former comrade and work out the details with the player on the spot. The personal impact table provides ideas for plot hooks that could directly involve a player character in a scenario. Personal impact table. Roll a d6 to determine personal impact. 1. A former comrade in arms asks a player character for help. 2. One of the adventurers is from a place destroyed during the war. Refugees from that location ask for their help. 3. One of the characters served with the villain during the war, and the villain betrayed them or their nation. 4. The villain was the cruel commander of a camp where one of the characters was held as a prisoner of war. 5. One of the adventurers made a promise to a comrade during the war, and achieving the goal of the adventure will fulfill that promise. 6. The adventure revolves around something one of the characters saw during the war: a powerful weapon, an unusual battlefield, or a unique warforged. Bitter grievances. Alliances shifted during the war, and almost every nation has grievances with every other one. Some of these post-war feuds rage more fiercely than others. One of these sources of tension could play a role in a character's backstory, the plot of an adventure, or the reactions of an NPC. Although the nations are afraid to return to all-out war, any of these feuds could escalate. Onder and the Eldeen reaches. 40 years ago, the farmers of Western Onder joined with the druids of the Towering Woods in seceding from the kingdom and founding the Eldine Reaches. Most Ondarians consider this an unforgivable act of treason committed at a time of national weakness. The Reachers say their actions were precipitated by the neglect and corruption of the Ondarian nobles. Now that the war is over, many Ondarians believe Queen Orala should reclaim the Eldine Reaches, whether through diplomacy or force. Breland and Droam. Monstrous raiders from the western wilderness have plagued Breland for centuries. A decade ago, the daughters of Sorakel united the scattered warlords of the region under the flag of Droam. Furious clashes erupted between Breland and Droam, centering on the fortress of Orkbone and Brelish settlers in the west. Breland led the opposition to recognizing Droam as a nation under the Treaty of Thronehold, and some Brelish believe King Borinal should take dramatic action to end this threat. Sire and the world. Sirens maintain that they alone were in the right during the last war, which began when the other nations refused to acknowledge the Siren Queen's rightful claim to the throne of Galifar. Proud until the end, Sire clashed with all the other nations. Now Sire is destroyed, and Siren refugees everywhere are dependent on the kindness of their former enemies. But many of those people believe that Sire deserves no mercy, and that the refugees should be treated as enemy combatants rather than offered charity and compassion. Canath and Thrain. The enmity between these two nations runs far deeper and longer than what was wrought by the last war. Thrain is the bastion of the Church of the Silver Flame, while Canath resorted to necromancy in the course of the war. Thrains accuse Cans of being morally bankrupt. Cans say that the Thrains are arrogant and naive. This long-standing rivalry led to intense conflict in the early days of the war, and it only grew worse. When Thrain became a theocracy, Cans seized on this act as proof that the nation had abandoned the traditions of Galifar. When Canath integrated undead into its armies, Thrain swore it would never be at peace with those who would use such foul magic. Both nations have accepted the terms of the Treaty of Thronehold, and the Canathi king has forsworn the creation of new undead soldiers. But the treaty has done nothing to ease the enmity between the two. Thaliost. The ancient city of Thaliost was once part of Onder, and it has many proud ties to the history of that nation. It was seized by Thrain during the last war, and the Treaty of Thronehold ratified its occupation of the place. Thrain placed an Ondarian archbishop, Salgar Dorisnu, in charge of the city, and it has become a haven for Ondarian followers of the Silver Flame. But many of its citizens consider themselves to be Ondarians, and many prominent citizens of Onder are putting great pressure on Queen Orala to retake the city. The tension has been exacerbated by Archbishop Dorisnu, who has taken brutal action to suppress Ondarian opposition to Thrain's occupation of the city. Vaelnar. The elves of Vaelnar have broken the terms of the Treaty of Thronehold on several occasions. They regularly antagonize their neighbors, raiding and provoking everyone in reach of their war bands. Some independent war bands have even crossed the Talenta Plains to raid across the borders of Canath and Cubera. High King Vidalia insists that these are the actions of individual soldiers, but he refuses to take action against the perpetrators. Some scholars believe Vidalia and the Vaelnar are trying to provoke a full-scale conflict. By the strictures of their religion, they don't want to be conquerors, but they want a powerful enemy to attack their nation. If this hypothesis is true, they might continue to escalate their activity until Canath or another powerful nation is forced to react. Though the Vaelnar regularly raid their neighbors, these attacks rarely target civilians. The elves aren't interested in wealth or territory. They are looking for challenging battles. They might attack military outposts, patrols, adventurers, or other brigands, any force that seems like it could put up a good fight. Everyday impact. There's no place in Corvair that escaped the last war unscathed. Even villages that were never attacked lost their children to conscription or suffered from shortages. Some towns far from the front lines suffered damage from long-distance magic weapons or terror attacks. Anytime you are setting a scene, you could add some element that speaks to the ongoing impact of the last war. The Everyday Impact table offers some suggestions for these elements. Everyday Impact Table. Roll a d6 for an everyday impact. 1. A supply shortage is causing tension in the community. This shortage could be of a basic commodity, such as bread, a luxury item, such as wine, or an important service. 2. Demonstrators in the streets are protesting against refugees or Warforged, urging a return to war, complaining about shortages or neglect, or drawing attention to the needs of veterans, refugees, or others. 3. A disabled veteran shares war stories while begging for copper. 4. A crowd has gathered around two people engaged in a heated discussion about the war. 5. A street vendor is selling unusual souvenirs from the war, pieces of a Warforged Titan, shards of an airship, and other curiosities. 6. A memorial has been raised to commemorate members of the community lost in the war. The Cold War, no one knows what caused the mourning, and the fear of repeating this cataclysm, not the Treaty of Thronehold, is what keeps potential combatants at bay. No one is happy with the outcome of the war, but no one dares to continue fighting, since all believe that renewed full-scale conflict could result in utter destruction. That said, the general belief is that the mystery of the mourning will eventually be solved. Either someone will learn how to control the power that caused the Mornland, or the precise cause will be determined and people will be able to tell if it still poses a threat. Many people truly hope that the last war will live up to its name forever. But others prepare for more war even as they pursue peace. First and foremost, every nation wants to unravel the mystery of the mourning. A nation that could learn how to use this power would be unstoppable. Other forces are searching for weapons or forgotten powers that could turn the tide if another war breaks out. Adventurers could find themselves racing through ruins in Zendrick, trying to destroy a weapon of the ancient giants before the Emerald Claw can claim it for Kanath and Lady Ilmero. The characters can stumble into a web of intrigue without seeing the sticky strands. Perhaps a patron hires the adventurers to transport what seems to be an ordinary backpack full of goods, and they don't realize that it has a secret magical compartment until enemy spies come looking for whatever is inside it. Or a dying spy presses an amulet into the hand of one of the adventurers, saying, "The fate of Brelin depends on you getting this to Borenal. Don't trust anyone." Assuming the adventurers care about the fate of Brelin, they're pressed into an urgent adventure that has implications they might not see or understand. Playing during the last war. In your campaign, you might want to take a look back at the war as it unfolds. Setting an adventure during the last war puts the characters in a tumultuous time of political intrigue, tenuous alliances, and brutal conflicts. Consider these ways to make the last war a present reality in your campaign. The players create new characters who live during a specific phase of the war. These characters could be figures of legend whose great deeds are known to the present-day characters, or they could be unknowns caught up in events much larger than themselves. In either case, the adventure they undertake can set the stage for events in the present day of your campaign. You might run an introductory session or flashback set during the waiting years of the war, bringing the characters' backgrounds to life. Maybe the characters are all part of the same unit in the war, or they might be enemies forced to cooperate when disaster strikes. Are the characters participants in a memorable battle? Do they take actions they'll later regret? Do they make a bitter enemy who comes back to haunt them years later when the campaign continues in the present day? A magical phenomenon might send the characters back in time, putting them in the middle of the conflict. Are they transported there to learn something, to alter the course of history, or are they just stranded in a twisted time stream? How will they escape the horrors of the war and get back to their own time? Villains of the Last War. Just as adventurers are shaped by their experiences in the last war, villains often carry the physical and mental scars of the conflict. When developing the details of a villain's background, consider the following options. War criminal. What horrific actions did the villain take during the last war? Did they massacre civilians, betray their comrades or their nation? A brilliant artificer might have designed arcane weapons that violated the rules of engagement. A Kanathi Bone Knight, see Chapter 6, could have overseen a camp where prisoners of war were used as subjects in necromantic experiments. Is the villain infamous for their crimes, or yet to be exposed for what they did? Do they believe that their crimes were justified? Is the criminal protected by powerful people in their nation, or reviled by the people they served? Grim inspiration. Something the villain saw or experienced during the war made a lasting impression that still drives them today. Perhaps their family was killed in a senseless attack, and everything they are doing is motivated by a desire to avenge this loss. Maybe they think that they were betrayed by their own nation. Perhaps they were caught in the morning, and even though they somehow survived it, what they lived through drove them insane. Former comrade. A former comrade in arms can be a useful hook to draw adventurers into a story or a compelling villain. Which one of the characters served alongside the villain? Were they equals, or was one of higher rank? Did the villain abandon or betray the adventurer, or was it the adventurer who betrayed the villain? This option can be especially interesting for a Warforged villain. While searching for their own identity following the war, they have embraced a dark path. If you use this motif, it's important to develop the story in conjunction with the players whose characters are connected to the villain, either establishing crucial details ahead of time or developing them together by way of a flashback. War-torn survivor. At first meeting, the villain of an adventure might seem to be a person of honor, or at the least a hardscrabble survivor doing what they think is right after surviving the war. The villain might have experienced some of the same things in the war that the characters did, making it easy for the characters to understand the villain's point of view, or at least to harbor a sliver of doubt that makes them think twice before rushing to condemn the villain. The War-Torn Villains table suggests twists you can add to villains mentioned elsewhere in this chapter to give them and their schemes a tie to the last war. War-Torn Villains table. Roll a d6 for a villain. 1. The villain doesn't know or refuses to believe that the war has ended. 2. The villain experienced horrors during the war and targets the people they believe to be responsible. 3. The villain is using the skills they learned during the war to target war profiteers or national leaders. 4. The villain is a former military commander who commands soldiers who served under them in the war. 5. The villain is an ex-soldier with a grudge against citizens of a former enemy nation. 6. The villain wants the power to restart and properly finish the war. Fortified Outpost. Military outposts across Corvair serve a variety of purposes during and after the war. Rest stops for platoons on the move, garrisons for inactive troops, armories where weapons are stored, staging points for scouts and rangers who keep an eye on nearby enemy movements, and defensive fortifications meant to protect passes, bridges, or other key strategic locations. In an adventure, virtually anything can happen in or around it. Fortified Outpost features. This outpost, as shown on Map 4.5, is a simple building holding barracks, officers' quarters, and storage areas encased within multiple rings of fortification. A normal approach to the inner compound involves passing through one of two gatehouses, protected by arrow slits and murder holes, crossing an open courtyard, with more arrow slits and defenders on the rooftop above, passing through another small gate area, and traversing the training yard before finally reaching the lone entrance. An enormous magic weapon akin to a ballista is mounted atop the outpost and supported by a massive stone column. Depending on the outpost, this weapon might launch ballista bolts with tremendous force and speed, expel surges of lightning, hurl fireballs, or otherwise send devastating munitions at approaching enemies. A basement area is dedicated to storage, including holding cells to contain prisoners of war while they wait to be transported to dedicated prison camps. Fortified Outpost Adventures. The Fortified Outpost Adventures table provides some possibilities for adventures set in such a location. Fortified Outpost Adventures. Roll a d8 for an adventure premise. 1. The Order of the Emerald Claw has seized the outpost and is raising a legion of undead soldiers. 2. The outpost is said to be haunted by the vengeful spirit of a former commander who was slain by their own troops. 3. A tunnel beneath the outpost leads to a sealed portal to Zoriat. 4. The outpost borders the Mornland, where mutant monstrosities emerge from the mists. 5. When a force of aberrations arises from Kyber, this abandoned outpost is the adventurers' only chance to stop their advance. 6. The outpost is in a critical location, but it was damaged during the war. It needs to be protected while it is being restored. 7. The outpost is located on a manifest zone linked to Thelanis. It has been seized by a group of Fae, and the locals want it reclaimed. 8. The outpost was built on the foundations of an ancient goblin fortress, and treasures are rumored to lie buried beneath it. Lord of Blades. Stalking the Mornland like a spectral juggernaut, the Lord of Blades has emerged from the turmoil of the last war as a symbol that calls to all the Warforged of Corvair. Regardless of what they have become, the Warforged were created to fight and die on the orders of their creators. Some Warforged accept their history for what it is and look toward the future, but others hold a grudge because of how they were exploited by their creators. Those Warforged make up the followers of the Lord of Blades. The Lord of Blades preaches of an apocalyptic future in which the Warforged will destroy or enslave the nations of flesh and blood. We were made as weapons, the Lord of Blades has declared over and over. Let us be weapons. Let the nations of the land reap what they have sown. Today, Warforged roam the Mornland in service to the Lord of Blades, patrolling the devastated terrain and salvaging resources from the ashes of Sire. Most of these dissidents despise creatures of flesh, and any meeting with outsiders usually ends in blood being spilled. Other disciples of the Lord of Blades launch attacks on targets across Corvair, destroying Cannith workshops, killing nobles known for their abuse of Warforged, and seizing shipments of weapons or arcane research to further deplete their enemy. To the flesh and blood citizens of Corvair, the Lord of Blades is a figure of terror and pain. But the Warforged under his sway, and some objective observers of other races, believe that his rage is fueled by the injustice heaped upon the Warforged after their creation. The Warforged were treated as disposable soldiers, almost slaves, during the war and the post-war arguments over what rights the Warforged should be granted, as if fundamental rights were meant to be bestowed or withheld by political authorities, gave the Warforged themselves no voice, as if they were still a property of their creators. The Lord of Blades' call to action is appealing to many Warforged because it is grounded in legitimate grievances, even if the proposed action is abhorrent. Compared to the total number of Warforged created and deployed in combat during the last war, the followers of the Lord of Blades are not especially numerous. His existence and message are well known in the countries bordering the Mornland, especially Breland, but less familiar in the rest of Corvair. Hoping to swell the ranks of his followers, the Lord of Blades has agents spreading his apocalyptic message in every city with significant Warforged populations. The Lord of Blades in the war, the Lord of Blades didn't appear in the world until after the Day of Mourning. Only he knows what his identity was before then, but many suppositions have been put forth. Some scholars say that he was originally a Warforged named Bulwark, the personal bodyguard of King Borinal of Breland. Others believe that he was the last Warforged to emerge from the creation forges at Eston, completed in the last moments before the morning. Perhaps the most outlandish idea is that the Lord of Blades is not a true Warforged at all. The first Warforged were created by an artificer named R&D Cannith, who became furious when the house used his invention to create weapons of war. Based on that knowledge, some believe Aran transferred his consciousness into a Warforged body so that he could personally seek vengeance for the wrongs done to his children. In the years following the war, the Lord of Blades is a force to be reckoned with. The Warforged are some of the few beings able to thrive in the desolation of the Mornland, so the followers of the Lord of Blades are building a nation of their own amid the devastation. They search out and scour sites that were devastated in the morning to gather lost weapons and magic, all part of their preparations for full-scale war against the creatures of flesh. Warforged Ossuary. A Warforged ossuary is a former temple, crypt, or warehouse deep in the Mornland that now houses the remains of slain Warforged. It is a place of honor and reflection for the Lord of Blades and his followers. Warforged ossuary features. The ossuary depicted in Map 4.6 was once a temple, which has been refitted into a resting place for the Lord of Blades followers. Equal parts crypt, monument, vault, and workshop, the ossuary serves many functions for the Warforged who maintain it. Other ossuaries exist in a variety of locations. The basic functions of these places remain the same, regardless of the original purpose of the structure. The Lord of Blades Warforged troops defend these sites with their lives. Warforged Ossuary Adventures. The Warforged Ossuary Adventures table offers some reasons why characters might seek out such a place. Warforged Ossuary Adventures table. Roll a d6 for an adventure goal. 1. Rescue an artificer who is being forced to graft Warforged components onto the Lord of Blades warriors. 2. Locate a docent, see Chapter 5, carried by a Warforged wizard who has joined up with the Lord of Blades. 3. Capture a Warforged artificer thought to be an advisor to the Lord of Blades, who is touring a series of ossuaries and inspecting the remains. 4. Steal a House Cannith spellbook and workshop log from before the day of mourning that is being held in the ossuary's vault. 5. Extract a Warforged spy from within the Lord of Blades followers who is close to being discovered. 6. Retrieve a Cannith schema supposedly held within the ossuary that tells of a process for transferring a Warforged consciousness from one body to another. Lord of Blades NPC. The Lord of Blades highlights the issues surrounding the creation of the Warforged. He and his followers are ready antagonists, employing deadly methods in pursuit of their aims, but their ire isn't born from evil. The Lord of Blades' greatest desire is to ensure that his people have a future, but his methods are colored by his anger at the injustices the Warforged have suffered, and in some cases are still being subjected to. Examples of villains linked to the Lord of Blades appear in the Lord of Blades NPC table. Lord of Blades NPC table. Roll a d6 for an NPC. 1. A House Cannith apprentice Warforged becomes obsessed with the Lord of Blades message, disrupting house operations in the hope of becoming a warrior in the Mornland. 2. A Warforged druid devises diseases and poisons that have no effect on Warforged and starts to unleash them on the general populace. 3. A Warforged ranger relentlessly hunts creatures of flesh in the wilderness near the Mornland. 4. A Warforged assassin poses as a simple workshop assistant while exterminating those who speak out against the rights of the Warforged. 5. A mad artificer is trying to reactivate a destroyed Warforged Colossus. 6. A band of Warforged attacks a lightning rail, intent on stealing something in one of the cargo carriages. Lord of Blades campaign themes. The Lord of Blades is a charismatic leader seeking to incite the Warforged to violence, and thereby to take vengeance against their former oppressors. Although low-level characters might not be prepared to face the Lord of Blades himself, they can easily encounter a squad of his followers anywhere on Corvair. While the Lord of Blades and his minions can be a straightforward foe, it's also possible to add more depth to the conflict. Perhaps a squad of Warforged attacks a foundry in Shar. After repelling the attack, the adventurers realize that the owners are mistreating the Warforged who work the forges. What do? Another way to explore the facets of this issue is to introduce a Warforged supporter of the Lord of Blades, who doesn't engage in violence personally, such as a bard who moves among the Warforged of a major city while speaking about the many abuses leveled against Warforged. Especially if one of them is a Warforged, how would the characters react to this individual? The Lord of Blades can serve as a long-term opponent, as he continued to escalate his attacks over the course of the campaign. While he builds up his stronghold in the Mornland, he is also gathering the components to construct eldritch machines and other weapons. What would happen if the Lord of Blades were to discover the power that caused the morning and unleashed that power across Corvair? Sample: the voice of Thrain. Do they know the war is over? Against all logic and reason, people in Breland continue to argue that the Warforged, creations of House Cannith, lest we forget, are living people with souls, deserving of the same rights as the rest of us. And yet, while philosophical debates rage and street protests grow heated, Warforged who inhabit the dead land of Sire continue to fight as if the war had not ended, launching raids out of the dead gray mist to the neighboring lands, including, of course, Thrain, proclaiming allegiance to something called the Lord of Blades. These Warforged don't seem to recognize the people of Thrain as living people with souls, so it's hard to appreciate why we should treat them that way. Lord of Blades Adventure Hooks. The Lord of Blades Adventure Hooks table sets out some reasons how the characters could come in contact with the Lord of Blades. Lord of Blades Adventure Hooks table. Roll a d6 for an adventure hook. 1. A newly awakened docent, see Chapter 5, tells its new owner that the Lord of Blades is the only hope for averting a coming catastrophe. 2. A military officer hires the characters to retrace the steps of a lost scouting party into the Mornland and rescue the commander, who is the officer's son. 3. Warforged go missing over the course of several weeks. Then one resurfaces, badly damaged and raving about the Lord of Blades. 4. Characters strike out into a ruin held by the Lord of Blades and recover a lost relic that has resurfaced in the possession of Warforged soldiers. 5. A Warforged accused of murdering several members of their mercenary company claims to have no memory of the night in question. 6. The characters are met by a Warforged who delivers a written summons from the Lord of Blades himself, the Lords of Dust. Evil entities spawned at the dawn of time still haunt Eberron. The cities raised by those ancient overlords are now only ashes, but the Lords of Dust still dream of restoring their primordial dominion. These fiends bide their time in an inconceivably long game, sparring with the dragons of Argonesson, as they manipulate events in order to fulfill the words of the draconic prophecy in a way that will bring them victory. Though the Lords of Dust are mighty enough on their own, they serve greater masters known as the Overlords, see Chapter 6. Unfathomably powerful fiends, the Overlords were bound at the end of the Age of Demons by the power of the Silver Flame, and an Overlord can be released from this binding only if doing so can be made to fulfill the draconic prophecy. Every fiend spawned from Kyber-Os fealty to one of these Overlords. In many ways, the Lords of Dust are a reflection of the Chamber. Each group is trying to steer the fulfillment of the prophecy to serve its own ends. The goal of the Lords of Dust is to release the Overlords from their bindings and loose them upon Eberron in a new age of darkness. Despite this unified goal, the Lords of Dust operate as an alliance of like-minded cabals, rather than a single monolithic organization. Each cabal serves its particular overlord above all others, and the conditions that release one overlord could actually contradict those that would free another. Accomplished shapeshifters, the Lords of Dust have agents spread across Corvair. Some might wonder why, with all their talents, they haven't tried to conquer the world already. The reason is that they have no interest in ruling this world. They want to return it to the state of unnatural glory that existed before. Their only interest in humanoids' races is in directing them and their affairs down the paths necessary to release their overlords. Aside from that, dealing with mortals is a tedious chore. The Lords of Dust and the Lords of Dust took part in the events of the last war whenever they saw opportunities to further their dark version of the prophecy. It remains difficult to identify what events might have been manipulated by one of these fiends because their schemes take so long to play out. Far in the future, it might become apparent that a seeming victory for the forces of good, or a battle averted that spared hundreds from death, was ultimately the first step in an overlord's release. For instance, a soldier who was otherwise fated to die in the battle that was avoided goes on to tempt a good-hearted priest into becoming corrupted. In the years since the Thronehold Accords, the Lords of Dust continue on as they ever have, advancing one small step at a time. Demon Ruin. The Lords of Dust maintain a variety of safe houses and sanctums across Eberron, but their most tightly bound locations are the ruins left behind from the Age of Demons, scattered across the Demon Wastes. Demon Ruin features. Map 4.7 What a demon ruin might look like. A demon ruin is an echo of grandeur swathed in flame and ravaged by time. Despite the rich appointments and impeccable construction evident, even in the broken remains of the building, the place carries the unmistakable air of anguish and torment. Demon Ruin Adventures. The Demon Ruin Adventures table offers some reasons why characters might risk death in the Demon Wastes. Demon Ruin Adventures table. Roll a d4 for an adventure goal. 1. Make a desperate request for aid from a Lord of Dust who is, by all accounts, an enemy of the character's adversary. 2. Escort an innocent who is prophesied to destroy the Lord of Dust to the ruin, and there confront the fiend. 3. Carry an artifact to the river of black lava that runs through the demon ruin, which is the only place where the item can be truly destroyed. 4. Gather obsidian shards from the ruin as components for a rare spell. Lords of Dust NPC. Most of the Lords of Dust are Rakshasas, but any sort of fiend, devil, demon, or otherwise, could be part of this organization. Such fiends are spawned in Kyber and aren't actually from the outer planes. These fiends generally work through a wide network of duped pawns and indebted servitors. Each overlord has a chief servant, and these leaders meet in the ruins of Ashtakala in the Demon Wastes. Chapter 6 contains statistics for the overlord Rak Tulkesh and his speaker, Mordakesh the Shadow Sword. The overlord Solkatesh is served by the Rakshasa Hexula, also known as the First Scribe. Durastorin the Wiambreaker is the speaker of Belshalar, the overlord said to be bound in Flamekeep. The Lords of Dust NPC table describes some possible antagonists who might cross paths with adventurers. Lords of Dust NPC table. Roll a d6 for an NPC. 1. A virtuous paladin is hunting and destroying those who might one day thwart the Lords of Dust. 2. A possessed lord or lady spreads corruption throughout the noble house. 3. A wizard who sought to accelerate their own power by making a dark bargain must now pay the price demanded by their sinister patron. 4. A powerful demon has corrupted the local ruler in the name of its overlord. 5. A succubus or incubus tempts a mercenary warlord to engage in greater and greater battles. 6. One of the character's most trusted allies or servants turns out to be a Rakshasa in disguise. Lords of Dust campaign themes. The Lords of Dust have two basic goals. The first is to encourage activities that strengthen the influence of their overlords. Rak Tulkesh embodies war and conflict, and his minions are always eager to cause strife. The servants of Sol Kadesh entice cruel and selfish people to become warlocks, drawing mystical powers from their mistress. These activities won't release an overlord, but they help to sustain it. To release an overlord, the Lords of Dust must ensure that the prophecy unfolds along a specific path. Often, following this path requires specific mortals to do specific deeds. For example, one shred of the prophecy could stipulate that King Borinal has to be killed by one of the characters. The Lords of Dust could easily kill Borinal themselves, but that wouldn't be sufficient to bring about the desired end. Somehow, they'll have to trick the adventurer into doing it, because the Lords of Dust so often work through pawns and minions. It might take a while for adventurers to realize that an apparently unconnected series of encounters early in a campaign are actually all part of the complex schemes of the Lords of Dust. These fiends are so devious that it is often impossible to discern a pattern to their actions until their plans have come to fruition and the connections have finally been made clear. You could retroactively decide that what you intended as unconnected encounters were all part of the plan from the beginning. Lords of Dust Adventure Hooks. The Lords of Dust Adventure Hooks table presents some ways to get the characters into a fiendish adventure. Lords of Dust Adventure Hooks table. Roll a d6 for an adventure hook. 1. A retainer who died recently shows up again, as if nothing happened and with no memory of having died or of the events immediately preceding their supposed demise. 2. Agents of the chamber show up intent on murdering the characters because their recent actions have unwittingly been at the behest of a Lord of Dust and have twisted a portion of the prophecy. 3. A trusted mentor changes their tune abruptly and begins sending the characters on unusual tasks. 4. Everyone the characters used to deal with in town suddenly acts as if they've never seen the characters before. 5. Increasingly vicious fiends attack the camp every few nights. 6. Agents of a Lord of Dust apologetically kidnap a character's loved one, politely requesting that the character perform a series of favors to secure the hostage's release. The Mornland once Sire shone more brightly than any of its sibling nations in the Kingdom of Galifar. It was the center of the kingdom's wealth, a monument to its artistic and arcane achievements, and the site of great centers of learning where preeminent masters of magic, architecture, and artifice taught at the forefront of their craft. It was also the home of House Cannith and its massive foundries, some of them built on mountains or in mountains, some gracefully spanning canyons, and others erected in vast labyrinths deep underground. Today, this region is a festering wound across Corvair. A wall of mist surrounds a land twisted into strange and terrible shapes. Sire was once called the Jewel of Galifar. Now it is the Mornland. The morning. No one knows the reason for what happened on 20 Olarun 994 YK. Though it had been battered, Sire stood defiant. Siren soldiers had recently driven deep into Kannathi territory and were holding their lines against the combined forces of Breland and Thrain. And then it all came to an end. Some say that the dead gray mist began in Metral, initially flowing out of the royal palaces of Vermisherd. Others swear that the disaster began in the Cannith stronghold of Making. All that is known is that the mist swiftly spread across the kingdom, transforming the lands and creatures caught within it. Over 1 million people died in the morning, including nearly all of the inhabitants of Central Sire. The mist slowed its advance as it spread, and some of those in the borderlands heard of the disaster in time to flee. Others survived because they were already beyond the borders of Sire. The mist stopped mere feet away from the camps of Siren soldiers holding sections of the Brellish front. And though the vast majority of people caught in the morning died, thousands did survive. Most have no clear memory of the event, and there's no explanation for why they were spared. The superstitious say that these people are cursed, that anyone touched by the morning is now an agent of darkness. See the book's introduction for further details on how the morning might have affected characters. In the days immediately following the morning, many assumed that the mist would continue to spread. Intense panic slowly turned to curiosity as it became clear that the border had stabilized. Over the last 4 years, people have ventured into the mist for many reasons. Some sought to plunder the abandoned treasures of the richest nation in Galifar. Others hoped to find lost loved ones, or some explanation for the disaster. Few of these explorers have returned, and those survivors all tell tales of a land twisted in unpredictable and inexplicable ways. Mornland environment. The arcane energies that cause the day of mourning and that linger in the remains of Sire are mysterious and unpredictable, so they can be the cause of any bizarre magical effect you want to bring to bear in your game. Maps of Sire from before the day of mourning are of limited use nowadays. The land beyond the gray mist has been twisted and warped, and distances seem to expand and shrink, even as one treks across the wastes. As a result, any wisdom, survival check, or any check using navigator's tools made to negotiate the Mornland is made with disadvantage. As if the difficulties of navigation weren't bad enough, explorers must bring their own provisions into the Mornland, unless they want to risk the danger of ingesting tainted food and water. Terrain features. The day of mourning redefined the geography of Sire. The cataclysm raised land, swallowed lakes, and moved whole cities. In some areas, the earth has been torn and gouged as if by some colossal beast. In others, it has become iridescent glass or semi-liquid sludge. Trees in one place turn to crystalline onyx. The flowers in another place begin eerily buzzing when touched by a breeze. Nothing in the Mornland is as it was. The entire land is a scar left by the catastrophe of the morning. Mist wall. The borders of the Mornland are defined by a wall of thick, gray mist that rises thousands of feet into the air and forms a canopy that hides the ruined realm even from above. The area covered by the mist is a shadowy, muffled region devoid of life, sunlight, and sound. The wall of mist ranges in thickness from a few hundred feet to as much as 5 miles. Travelers who linger in the mist suffer a growing sense of claustrophobia and despair. It's easy to get lost in the impenetrable fog, and some travelers have wandered in circles, unable to find their way either through the mist or back outside it, until their food or water ran out or they blundered into the path of some mutated terror. The DC for Wisdom, Survival, checks to avoid getting lost in the mists is 15. See Becoming Lost in Chapter 5 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Patches of mist and less oppressive fog dot the interior of the Mornland, but the worst effects of the mist are confined to the border region. Glowing Chasm. The northern part of the Mornland is dominated by a great crack in the ground that emits a cold purple light. This supernatural glow emanates from deep within the glowing chasm, so far beneath the surface that its source hasn't been identified. The mutated monsters that roam the Mornland seem drawn to this location, and those that spend any significant time near the glowing chasm mutate further, becoming more twisted and misshapen than before. Crimson Water. Before the morning, a spring in the eastern part of Sire fed the rushing river as it traced a short but fertile path south to Kraken Bay. The bed of the rushing river is now as dry and barren as the rest of the Mornland, and the location of the spring is marked by the crimson water, a stagnant lake of blood-colored liquid. The shores of the crimson water are littered with the remains of animals and travelers that have strayed into the Mornland and sought to slake their thirst with a drink from the lake. At the lake bottom is the ruined town of Eastwood Springs, which once served as a resort for the leisure classes of Sire. As yet, no one has been brave or foolish enough to search for lost treasures in the depths of the crimson water. Unusual locations. At places smaller in scale than the major features described above, explorers in the Mornland might encounter any kind of terrain feature with bizarre magical properties. The Unusual Locations table offers some ideas. Unusual Locations table. Roll a d6 for a location. 1. A pool of glowing water sits in the middle of a ruined and abandoned village. Anyone who looks into the water sees brief reflections of the long-dead villagers going about their lives in harmony and joy. 2. In the middle of the wreckage of a carnival stands a perfectly preserved carousel. If the carousel is ridden, the characters doing so see visions of Sire as it was before the last war. 3. All the trees and plants in a forest have been turned to objects of glossy white stone with blood-red flecks. 4. The battlefield before the characters contains no bodies, only the clothing and weapons of thousands of missing soldiers. 5. The broken bodies of soldiers lie scattered across a battlefield, refusing to decompose. 6. The characters find a fallen Warforged Colossus, described later in this section. Creatures of the Mornland. Many creatures were slain outright by the morning. Others were mutated as the land was transformed. Sometimes the result was an entirely new life form. Any previously unseen monster could appear as a spawn of the morning. Other creatures retained a semblance of their original physiology while taking on some sort of alteration. The Monstrous Mutations table has options for altering existing monsters to reflect this phenomenon. Most Warforged were unaffected by the morning, and the race as a whole seems immune to many of the lingering effects that plague the Mornland. As such, the Warforged who follow the Lord of Blades constitute the closest thing to a humanoid society that can be found in the Mornland. Similarly, golems and other constructs were largely unaffected by the morning. The morning had no effect on existing undead, and a large number of new undead came into being when the cataclysm occurred. Various spirits, such as ghosts and specters, linger near the places where they died, and the corpses that litter an abandoned battlefield might rise up to continue fighting whenever a living creature comes near. Some of these entities are similar to undead that might be encountered outside the Mornland, but others have alterations that are tied to the unusual manner of their deaths. You can use the Monstrous Mutations table to generate some details. Many of the mutations on this table might increase a creature's challenge rating by 1 or 2. Use the guidelines in Chapter 9 of the Dungeon Master's Guide to determine whether its challenge rating should increase and by how much, or you can simply increase it by 1 or 2 as you see fit. Many Mornland creatures have mutations that are purely cosmetic and don't change their stat blocks. For example, one might have eyes that look like gemstones or might display glowing patterns on its skin or fur. Monstrous Mutations. Roll a d6 for mutation. 1. The creature has grown to an unusual size. You can either set its new size and alter its statistics using the guidelines in the Dungeon Master's Guide, or apply the enlarge effect of the enlarge/reduce spell to it. 2. The creature has developed magical camouflage. It gains proficiency in the stealth skill, and it has the chameleon skin trait. It has advantage on dexterity, stealth, checks made to hide. 3. The creature's body has been infused with one kind of energy: acid, cold, fire, or lightning, your choice, or determine randomly. Its melee attacks deal an extra 1d6 damage of that type, and it has the elemental body trait. A creature that touches it or hits it with a melee attack while within 5 feet of it takes 1d10 damage of that type. You can adjust these damage numbers to suit the creature's challenge rating. 4. The creature has the magic resistance trait. It has advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. 5. The creature has a supernatural ability to heal its wounds. It has the Regeneration trait. It regains hit points at the start of its turn equal to the maximum value of one of its hit dice. If it takes acid or fire damage, this trait doesn't function at the start of the creature's next turn. A particular creature might be susceptible to different damage types. The creature dies only if it starts its turn with 0 hit points and doesn't regenerate. 6. The creature has 2 heads. If it has a bite attack, it can use multi-attack as an action to make 2 bite attacks. If it already has multi-attack, it adds a bite attack to its attack routine. It also gains the 2 heads trait. It has advantage on wisdom, perception checks, and on saving throws against being blinded, charmed, deafened, frightened, stunned, and knocked unconscious. Magical effects. The catastrophe of the morning altered more than the landscape and living creatures. The devastation caused localized alterations in the way magic functions. In some places, magic barely functions or certain magical functions are warped. In other places, spells persist past the instant of their casting and start behaving as if they were independent, living creatures. A common misunderstanding about the Mornland is that healing spells refuse to work. The fact is that healing spells are impeded within the dead gray mist and occasionally in other areas, making it harder for someone to cast them effectively. Because so few expeditions make it far past the mist, the inability to heal is widely assumed to be a property of the Mornland as a whole. The environmental effects table provides suggestions for weird magic that might pervade a small or large area of the Mornland. Effects might shift from day to day or even hour to hour. Environmental effects table. Roll a d8 for an effect. 1. Healing spells are impeded here. Any spell that restores hit points does so as if it were cast at a level 1 lower than the spell slot expended. A spell cast using a first level slot restores no hit points. 2. A character who casts a spell must make a Constitution saving throw against the character's own spell save DC. On a failed save, the character takes psychic damage equal to the spell's level and gains 1 level of exhaustion. 3. Any medium humanoid that dies in the area reanimates as a zombie at the start of its next turn. The zombie is under the DM control. 4. The area is affected by a silent spell. 5. Each creature that enters the area is affected by an enlarge/reduce spell, with an equal chance for each effect. The effect lasts until the creature leaves the area. 6. The pull of gravity is lessened. Creatures can jump twice the normal distance in any direction, and everything effectively weighs half its actual weight. 7. All creatures are linked to every other creature in the area as if by the telepathy spell. 8. A creature that casts a spell of first level or higher in the area rolls on the Wild Magic Surge table in Chapter 3 of the Player's Handbook. Sights and ruins of all the bizarre and horrific spectacles of the Mornland. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is represented by the ruins of the once glittering cities of Sire. Some have been reduced to rubble, while others are eerily preserved, devoid of life, but otherwise unharmed. In some of them, treasures left behind by the former inhabitants await discovery, and many people across Corvair are eager to get their hands on such spoils for a wide variety of reasons. Battlefields and the Field of Ruins. Sire was the site of incessant battles during the last war, from the first extended campaign, the Siege of Eston in 895 YK, to the running battle on the Saren Road that was cut short when the morning occurred. Battlefields across the Mornland, both ancient and recent, stand like open graves as evidence of the horrors of the war. In some places, armies that were fighting on the day of mourning became stone statues anchored in position. Others were crystallized or reduced to ash. On the Field of Ruins, around the Saren Road in the southwest part of the Mornland, where allied forces of Thrain and Breland battled an outnumbered Siren army on the day of mourning, the fallen soldiers are preserved just as they fell, with no sign of rot or decay. Thousands upon thousands of corpses lie scattered across the field, face down in the dirt or staring lifelessly at the gray sky. Even seasoned bands of treasure hunters are loath to enter the Field of Ruins. Eston, House Cannith was born in Eston, and the house's labors transformed the city into a place of wonders. Clockwork birds perched and sang in silvery trees covered in steel bark. Sky coaches carried smiths and magrites from forge to forge, and an iridescent dome protected the city from storms and harsh winds. On the proving grounds of the Cannith Creation Forges, Cotters of newborn Warforged learned the combat skills that would prepare them for active duty. Eston began as a successful mining settlement, extracting iron and rare ores from the nearby hills. Drawing on these resources, the Cannith artificers in Eston spent decades researching all sorts of artificial creatures, which eventually gave rise to the Warforged. Because of these wonders, Eston is an irresistible attraction for treasure hunters hoping to access the vaults of House Cannith. Reports suggest, however, that it has become a strange and deadly place. It's said that the city is overrun by living spells. In addition to the remnants of damaging spells, see Living Spells in Chapter 6, there are stranger phenomena, living continual flames that crawl along the streets, cling to lampposts, and flee from strangers, and living scrying spells that shift and shimmer, displaying distant scenes on their amorphous skin. Eston was renowned for its clockwork menagerie and its steel gardens, a showcase that chronicles House Cannith's centuries of work developing constructs and homunculi. These creatures have been twisted by the morning and have become deadly monsters. Stories tell of an enormous gorgon golem, of razor-winged swarms of silver songbirds, and many other equally strange things. Making and the Glass Plateau. Many people believe that the city of Making was at the epicenter of whatever caused the mourning. The cataclysm reshaped the terrain around the city, creating the Great Highland Formation known as the Glass Plateau. The Glass Plateau is mostly smooth and flat, though jagged spikes and spires jut up from the ground in seemingly random places. The central portion of the Highland Plain is obsidian, and bursts of fiery light can sometimes be seen in its dark depths. Toward the edges of the plateau, the glass becomes lighter in color and more transparent, appearing almost pale white along the jagged cliffs at the edge. Nothing grows on the plain of glass, and few creatures haunt its jagged peaks and flat expanse. The ruins of Making still peek through the obsidian flats of the Glass Plateau. Those who believe that the mourning started here also expect that Making is where the mystery of its origin will be unraveled. A secret Cannith facility is supposed to lie in the city's subterranean depths. Metrol. This city was once the capital of Sire. Now it lies empty, seemingly waiting along the Sire River for its people to return. Parts of Metrol have been shattered, their buildings crushed and tumbled by whatever force destroyed the nation. Other portions of the city escaped with superficial damage. Aside from the absence of people and the shroud of mist that hangs over the area, it looks much as it did before Sire fell. The days in Metrol are quiet, but the nights bring a cacophony of chaos and violence to the streets. At night, misshapen monsters emerge from their lairs to prowl and wail as they hunt each other for food. Mornland Villains. Few people have reason to spend time anywhere near the Mornland. Among the exceptions are those who seek to plunder the riches of lost Sire, such as Acar salvage, described below. These treasure hunters are also the kind of people who make interesting villains, teaming up with adventurers one day and betraying them the next. In addition to these salvagers, the Lord of Blades, described in more detail earlier in this chapter and in Chapter 6, is a major force in the Mornland. The Mornland Villains table suggests other possible evil schemes and influences that might arise in connection with the Mornland. Mornland Villains table. Roll a d6 to determine villain. 1. The Lord of Blades maintains a detention center where experiments are performed on adventurers and scavengers that his forces capture in the Mornland. 2. The leader of a cult devoted to Belashera, the Lord of Eyes, uses Dalcore tentacles to tear out the eyes of victims and attaches them to members of the cult. 3. A powerful member of House Cannith hopes to find something in the Mornland that will guarantee the ascendancy of her branch of the house. 4. A Canathi Bone Knight, see Chapter 6, wants to raise up an undead army from the corpses in the Mornland. 5. A Rakshasa works to free a fiendish overlord trapped in a whirlwind of stone and sand somewhere in the Mornland. 6. a servant of the Lords of Dust, maintains an extensive collection of severed heads and continues to draw on the knowledge in their brains. Adventures and encounters. In contrast to the salvagers and treasure hunters who undertake most of the expeditions to the Mornland, some individuals enter the churning mist with good intentions in mind. Most of these adventurers are displaced Sirens or are hired by such people, ranging from common folk hoping to retrieve family heirlooms to servants of Prince Orjev, who hopes to recover the lost regalia of the Siren crown. Two of the Dragonmart houses, Ordian and Canneth, also have vested interests in investigating the Mornland's ruins and often hire adventurers to pursue those interests. House Ordian wants to restore the lightning rail line that crosses the Mornland, which would reconnect the western and eastern halves of Corvair. House Canneth wants to recover trade secrets, experimental artifacts, and magic items from the creation forges, foundries, and secret laboratories it lost on the Day of Mourning. The Mornland Adventure Hook's Table includes a range of potential opportunities that could lead a group of adventurers into the Mornland. Mornland Adventure Hook's Table. Roll a d6 for an adventure hook. 1. A gatekeeper druid wants a rock sample from the Glass Plateau. 2. A magerite from House Canneth wants the party to escort him to a Warforged Colossus. The magerite wants to retrieve the Docent network from the Colossus before an unscrupulous House Fireland operative does so. 3. On her deathbed, the visionary artist who designed the lightning rail station at Metro reveals that she hid a treasure map within a lamp in her old office. 4. A wealthy eccentric asks the party to go into the Mornland and retrieve his most prized possession, a letter from a lover, a mechanical caterpillar, or anything else you devise, from his mansion. 5. A young Siren paladin is morose because she was away from Sire on a mission when the Day of Mourning occurred and never got to say goodbye to her family. She longs to retrieve her father's sword. 6. An elderly knight is strapping on his armor one last time so he can ride into the Mornland and die on the battlefield where his companions perished and where I should have been. Encounters and Trinkets. The Mornland is a dangerous place full of bizarre, inexplicable, and often localized magical effects. Literally anything can happen in this place. The Mornland Encounters table and the Mornland Trinkets table offer just a glimpse of the weirdness that adventurers might come across in their travels into the ruins of Sire. Mornland Encounters table. Roll a d6 for an encounter. 1. The party meets flickering images of their future selves who are trying desperately to communicate, but their message is garbled. 2. The party encounters a revenant who was murdered by House Canneth assassins after she learned too much about the house's secret research. The characters can appease her by promising to help her get revenge. 3. A tiny kitten mews from inside a hollow log. Within a few hours after being freed, it grows into an adult displacer beast. 4. The apparition of a parent searches for their lost child. As soon as the two are reunited, parent and spirit child both vanish. 5. The mist congeals into the form of a long-lost love of one of the adventurers. The mist apparition used the ghost stat block, wants the character to stay here forever. 6. The characters come across the skull of a buried Warforged Colossus. Mornland Trinkets table. Roll a d10 for a trinket. 1. The favorite childhood toy of one of the adventurers, floating in midair. 2. A tin whistle that makes beautiful colors and patterns magically appear when it's played. 3. A toy lightning rail car. 4. A glass eye. 5. A silver lapel pin of a finely detailed Gorgon's head with ruby eyes. 6. A monocle that can be used as a telescope. 7. A 6-inch tall mechanical marmoset in need of minor repairs. 8. A small medallion made of silver, depicting a tower with an eye at the top of it and other smaller eyes embedded in the sides. 9. A cloak pin made of iron in the shape of 2 hammers joined by a semicircular haft. 10. A wooden dinosaur toy that has movable legs. Warforged Colossus. Mere weeks before the day of mourning, House Cannith unleashed its mightiest creations, the Warforged Colossi. Hundreds of feet tall, these gargantuan warriors thundered across Sire, crushing everything in their path and leaving ruin in their wake. Meant to end the war decisively, these arcane war machines could pulverize soldiers beneath their feet and incinerate entire legions with beams of red light radiating from their mouths. But as the Colossi were beginning to turn to the lands outside Sire, the morning came and the Colossi perished. Now their remains lie, like mountains in the Mornland, filled with secrets and waiting to be explored. History of the Colossi. House Cannith spent much of the war working on various kinds of constructs that could serve as soldiers, siege engines, or other weapons of war. Their earliest efforts, which lumbered onto Siren battlefields in the late 930s YK, were barely more than golems with limited sentience, difficult to command in the field. The Warforged Titans were developed over the next 20 years, and the modern Warforged, often perceived as the pinnacle of Cannith engineering, first saw battle in 965. Successful as the Warforged were, though, House Cannith never lost interest in building a better Titan. Sire didn't lose its desire for deadly weapons that could give it an edge over its enemies, and tremendous amounts of gold flowed from Sire's coffers into the vaults of House Cannith as research and development continued, working toward a new kind of Warforged that would bring an end to the war once and for all, and establish Sire's martial supremacy for centuries to come. With Sire's immense wealth fueling its effort, House Cannith called upon the ingenuity of its best artificers and magerites. Construction began on enormous new creation foundries, hundreds of feet tall, carved into the sides of mountains or secretly nestled within remote canyons. The project succeeded beyond Sire's wildest dreams. When the original Warforged Colossus took its first thunderous footsteps, it was met with a reaction of equal parts awe and horror, and it was almost immediately sent north toward Metrol, where armies from Canath were menacing the Siren capital. Operating a Colossus. A Warforged Colossus is part Warforged and part vehicle. It stands between 200 and 300 feet tall. For optimal performance, a Colossus required an active crew, including a captain with the Mark of Making, a weapons officer with the Mark of Storm, and a helmsman with the Mark of Passage. When absolutely necessary, though, the Colossus could direct itself, but at diminished power. A Colossus also carried a sizable contingent of elite troops, who could ride in safety within the Colossus while it crushed through enemy lines or smashed through a wall, then pour out through hatches once the Colossus was in position. Docent Network. Controlling a construct of such size proved to be a great challenge for the Cannith artificers. The solution entailed creating a large number of Docent Nodes and joining them together in a single network distributed throughout the body of the Colossus. Docent Nodes are modeled after the ancient docents found in Zendrik, described in Chapter 5, and though they lack the full sentience or functionality of a true docent, collectively they can guide and control a Colossus. The network converged at one place, where the captain could stand and control the Colossus's every movement through the use of a mithril helmet with hundreds of semi-organic tendril wires attached. By way of the central master docent, a true docent recovered from Zendrik, the whole network fed information back to the operator. Several smaller hubs of the network gave other operators access to the relevant parts of that information and enabled them to control parts of the Colossus as well. The techniques and tools used to create Docent Nodes were lost in the morning. The various branches of House Cannith are sending adventurers into the Mornland in hopes of salvaging some or all of the network inside a fallen Colossus. Colossus Power Core. The power source of a Colossus is a Kyber dragon shard of unusually large size, cut into a specific pattern that allows the dragon shard to contain raw magical energy without exploding. A single power core is about the size of a wine barrel, hooked up to an elaborate harness that distributes power throughout the Colossus. Weapons of mass destruction. Warforged colossi were physically powerful, but their principal weaponry involved the use of bound elementals. Some expelled blasts of elemental fire from their hands or mouths. Others wielded adamantine swords they could wreathe in flame. Some colossi also used bound elementals for defense, manifesting shields of elemental rock, blasting out elemental air to deflect ranged attacks, and so on. The captain of the Colossus could control all this weaponry through the Docent network, but for optimal performance, the captain relied on a weapons officer with the Mark of Storm to employ this elemental weaponry. Finding a Colossus. When adventurers discover a Colossus, it might be in any state. Some have fallen or collapsed and become overgrown with vegetation to the point where one could be mistaken for a small hill. One was engulfed when the rock under its feet turned to liquid and swallowed it up, encasing it in a stone prison when the rock hardened. Some are buried, except for the head, perhaps, or a hand, which serves as a clear indicator that something lies underneath. Adventurers might even stumble upon a reality the world isn't ready to face. An operational Colossus, see the stat block in Chapter 6. Entering a Colossus. Map 4.8 shows a fallen Colossus. The mostly hollow interior of a Colossus is large enough for the crew and soldiers to travel in safety. The area features tunnels, ladders, hallways and crawlways, control rooms, storage rooms, arbalest turrets, and observation decks, with comfort a low priority. Only minimal crew quarters are provided, and the inside has no kitchen or dining areas. Normal operating procedure called for the crew to exit the Colossus at night and camp outside it. A Colossus usually has multiple hatches to allow entrance and egress, on the legs, on the back, in the chest, in the mouth, or on the back of the head, and so on. But entering the remains of a Warforged Colossus is not a task to be taken lightly, since the Mornland can have bizarre effects on the Colossus's Docent network, power core, and weaponry, as well as its mind. Elemental life. Even though a Colossus has fallen, its Docent nodes and elemental defenses might still be active. The dragon shards that once bound the elemental that powered the Colossus's main weapon might have been broken, allowing the elemental to escape from its bondage and roam the body of the Colossus, which has become its lair. Or perhaps it has come under the control of the Master Docent, and now does its twisted will, defending the interior of the Colossus and giving voice and form to the Docent's otherwise disembodied intelligence. A deadly dungeon. House Canet's artisans lined the interior of each Colossus with magic wards and traps in case enemy soldiers breached its defenses. As long as the primary operator remained connected to the Master Docent and in control, the traps were inactive, but if the operator gave an alert, or simply left their station or died, the Master Docent would send a signal through the network to seal the doors, activate the arcane wards, and arm the traps in any area that was under attack. A Grisly Tomb. Most colossi are tombs filled with the bodies of the crews that perished in the cataclysm. But the mourning affected everything in bizarre ways, so a venture inside a Colossus is often terrifying. A horrific monster might have made its lair in a Colossus's interior in the years since the mourning. The Master Docent in another one might speak through the brass horns that the crews used to communicate, growing increasingly incoherent and slash or sinister. The crew of a Colossus might be undead, zombies lumbering through the Colossus's interior, or spirits doomed to haunt it until they can find blessed release. Order of the Emerald Claw. What arose as an order of militant knights within the nation of Canath fell into disgrace and became a shattered remnant. The Order of the Emerald Claw now operates as a collection of cells of fanatical warriors, necromancers, and spies. On the surface, its members seem to be driven by Canathi patriotism, and they purport to be adherents of the blood of Vol. The most cursory investigation reveals that claim to be a facade. The truth behind the Emerald Claw is that they serve the Lick Lady Ilmero, and in her name they carry out acts of destruction, murder, and necromantic terrorism. They have been linked to the theft of powerful items imbued with necromancy magic, and they often employ vicious undead minions that make even other Khans uncomfortable. Most worshippers of the blood of Vol are quick to point out that they don't accept the Order's claim to membership in their faith, and those true worshippers vehemently reject the Emerald Claw's violent fanaticism. The Emerald Claw and the War. During the last war, Kanath was forced to embrace the practice of necromancy to bolster the ranks of its army. At the same time, a number of chivalric orders were founded by devoted worshippers of the blood of Vol. These groups included necromancers and bone knights that were trained to raise and command the undead troops used during the war. The Order of the Emerald Claw was one of the most infamous of these groups, renowned for its fighting skills, but often sanctioned for its brutal treatment of enemy soldiers. The Emerald Claw were also accused of slaughtering civilians so they could be raised as skeletons or zombies, behavior that was strictly forbidden by the Kanath commanders. When King Caius Roman III came to power near the end of the war, he turned against the blood of Vol. The orders were disbanded, and many members of the Emerald Claw were condemned as war criminals. While the other orders complied with the king's edict, many knights of the Emerald Claw refused to surrender. The order fragmented as its original members scattered, but a number of those rebellious knights started their own cells, rallying all who wanted to see Kanath achieve its rightful glory. The order experienced a surge in membership following the Treaty of Thronehold, because many Khans thought that Caius Roman III had betrayed their nation by embracing peace. 6 years ago, shortly after Caius's accession, a figure known as Lady Ilmero emerged as the leader of the Order of the Emerald Claw. Few of her followers know anything about her, other than her great skill as a necromancer. Many members of the Order refer to her as Queen of the Dead. Some members of the Order believe she will ultimately raise Kanath above all other nations. Others simply trust that she will grant them personal power. They believe that she is poised to become a god of death, and that when she ascends to divinity, they will be granted immortality, or at least the eternal life of undeath. Library Vault. Map 4.9 shows a library vault maintained by the Order of the Emerald Claw. The Order collects dark materials and forbidden magic and holds them for safekeeping in these heavily defended locations. Each vault also functions as a chapter house or a sanctuary for a local cell. Library Vault features. Library vaults can be found in a variety of locations. Some of them are crypts or dungeons secreted away underground, while others are hidden in plain sight inside a home or a business. Whatever its specific location, a vault is always equipped with defensive features, some of which remain active even after the outer door is breached. Library Vault Adventures. The Library Vault Adventures table outlines some possibilities for adventure involving one of these locations. Library Vault Adventures Table. Roll a d6 for an adventure goal. 1. Destroy a scroll containing an incantation that allows even non-spellcasters to animate the dead. 2. Steal the journal of a powerful necromancer that's being held in the vault's collection. 3. Trade a powerful dark magic weapon in return for the rescue of important hostages taken by the Order. 4. Steal a suit of armor that contains the soul of a hero slain during the last war. 5. Search the collection for information on the Queen of the Dead, or Lady Ilmero, as she is known. 6. Infiltrate the vault to get close to a new Emerald Claw recruit, then convince them to come to their senses and return to their family. Order of the Emerald Claw NPC. Given the undeniable nature of the Order, villains associated with the Emerald Claw present an opportunity to provide characters with adversaries that are memorably evil and that revel in their villainy. Emerald Claw NPC Table. Roll a d6 for an NPC. 1. Though mortal, this fanatical warrior drinks the blood of those he slays in battle. 2. A cleric tries to convince her enemies to embrace the Order promising eternal life through undeath. 3. A noble with sympathies toward the order hides a cell's library vault within the grounds of their estate. 4. A suave vampire would rather charm its enemies than crush them in battle. 5. An artificer is obsessed with infusing necromantic curses into their construct creations. 6. A changeling necromancer often poses as a vampire or a mummy, even though it's still alive. Emerald Claw Campaign Themes. At low levels, adventurers can clash with Emerald Claw skeletons and zombies. As the characters grow more capable, the threats escalate. They might have to protect a village from a necromancer who is sucking the life out of the land, or race through a dungeon to acquire a necromantic relic before the claw can claim it. The Emerald Claw is ideally suited to pulp action. It's a force that is blatant in its villainy and has hordes of evil minions to do its bidding. Defeating the schemes of the Emerald Claw should always feel like the right thing to do. Although many members of the Emerald Claw believe that they are fighting for Canath, they are truly serving the Lick Lady Elmero, see Chapter 6. The greatest necromancer of the age, she seeks to unlock the secrets of her inactive dragon mark, the Mark of Death. If she succeeds, she could come to possess unimaginable power. This makes her a formidable villain to drive the action of an entire campaign. Emerald Claw Adventure Hooks. The Emerald Claw Adventure Hooks table offers some options to kick off adventures featuring the Emerald Claw that take place outside their sanctuaries. Emerald Claw Adventure Hooks table. Roll a d8 for an NPC. 1. What at first appears to be a renegade group of Ondarian soldiers turn out to be undead under the Order's control. 2. The Order strikes at a small keep, demanding the inhabitants surrender a particular volume from their library. 3. Investigating strange lights and sounds emanating from a crypt in the dead of night reveals the Emerald Claw experimenting on the corpses within. 4. The Emerald Claw violates graves near a small village, animating the corpses into undead laborers to help build an eldritch machine. 5. The Emerald Claw claims a village town hall for its own use, and any who come near are attacked. The sounds of torture ring out from within the building. 6. Investigating disappearances among an elf community reveals that the Order of the Emerald Claw has been attempting to inscribe something like a dragon mark in their skin, then reanimating the failed experiments as zombies. 7. While searching for a magic item in Dakoni ruins across southern Corvair, the characters discover that Emerald Claw agents are looking for the same thing and seem to have access to information the adventurers lack. 8. A large force of Emerald Claw Knights offers the characters a choice: join the Order or submit themselves to death and an eternity of servitude from beyond the grave. Planes of existence. Eberron is part of the Great Wheel of the Multiverse, as described in the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. At the same time, it is fundamentally apart from the rest of the Great Wheel, sealed off from the other planes even while it's encircled by its own wheeling cosmology. Eberron's unique station in the multiverse is an important aspect of the world. Its planes have profound and shifting influences on the material plane, and it is sheltered from the influences and machinations of gods and other powers elsewhere on the Great Wheel. The planet of Eberron is the heart of its own material plane. It is surrounded by the Ring of Cyberes. Beyond this band of dragonshards, 12 moons orbit the world. To date, no creature from Eberron has explored the moons, and none can say whether they are lifeless rocks or thriving worlds. Some sages believe that the moons are connected to the planes, or that they might even be physical extensions of the planes, but the truth of these assertions remains unknown. No other planets have been discovered within Eberron's material plane. The underworld of Kyber, however, contains a host of demiplanes, tiny pockets of altered reality. As such, venturing beneath the surface of Eberron can lead you to a network of caverns and passages, and if you find the right passage, it can take you to fantastic and deadly places inhabited by fiends, aberrations, and other children of Kyber. Planes of Eberron. The material plane is enfolded by 13 planes of existence. Many of these have aspects of both outer planes and inner planes. All of them overlap with Eberron in some way, and they influence and are influenced by the material plane. The intensity of this influence waxes and wanes. Scholars often depict the planes as orbiting Eberron, sometimes coming close, other times far away, though this manner of expression is merely a metaphor for their shifting influence. When another plane's influence on the material plane is especially strong, the plane is said to be coterminous. When its influence is weak, a plane is remote. The state of a plane can be important for performing epic rituals, creating of eldritch machines, or interacting with extraplanar entities. Whether or not a plane is remote or coterminous at a given time depends entirely on the needs of your story. Manifest zones. At certain places in the material plane, the barriers between worlds are thin, and some characteristics of another plane can bleed through into the material world. These places are called manifest zones, and the nature of each one is strongly shaped by the plane it connects to. The city of Sharn is located in a manifest zone linked to Serenia that keeps its towers reaching toward the sky and aids flight. Ghosts might linger in a manifest zone associated with Dalcore, while a manifest zone tied to Lamania might have wild vegetation and enhanced druidic magic. A manifest zone might include a portal that allows free passage from either plane to the other. The descriptions of other planes in this section offer some other possible effects. Most manifest zones have reliable, persistent effects. Some have only weak connections to their planes, and their properties influence the world only when the plane is coterminous. Tour of the planes. Each of the 13 planes in Eberron's cosmology is briefly described below, both in general terms as well as by the effects that occur or appear on the material plane in manifest zones linked to that plane. Donvi, the perfect order. Donvi embodies absolute order, along with the ideals of law and discipline and their impact on civilization. The perfectly ordered, immaculate districts of the plane represent different aspects of law, precisely maintained fields, legalistic tribunals, and hordes of moderns compiling archives of every rule or regulation ever created. Some districts are governed by a justice system based in goodness, where laws help to maintain harmony. In more oppressive locations, harsh laws are imposed on the suffering populace by tyrannical devils. Donvi Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. People who live in the manifest zone are inclined to follow duly enacted regulations without question, regardless of moral implications. 2. Creatures can't tell deliberate lies while in the area. 3. Flora and fauna are preternaturally orderly and homogeneous. Trees here grow in neat rows without needing to be tended. Rocks are situated in geometric patterns, and identical cattle graze in unison. 4. A contingent of moderns is methodically deconstructing and reorganizing the zone, heedless of their effect on the other inhabitants. Dalcore, the region of dreams. Mortal creatures come into contact with Dalcore when they dream, except for elves, Kalister, and Warforged, which don't dream. The outer fringes of the plane are shaped by the memories and experiences of dreamers. The dark core at the heart of the plane is shaped by the nightmare force known as the Dreaming Dark. The primary inhabitants of Dalcore are the Quarry, enigmatic master manipulators that can inhabit the dreams of others. Tens of thousands of years ago, the Quarry fought a bitter war with the giants of Zendrick. The giants ended the war by severing the connection between Dalcore and Eberron and disrupting the cycle of the planes. As a result, Dalcore is always remote in relation to the material plane, and no manifest zones are tied to Dalcore. The only way to reach Dalcore from the material plane is through the psychic projection of dreaming, and the Quarry are forced to possess mortal hosts to work their will on Eberron. Dalcore, the realm of the dead. When a mortal soul dies, it is drawn to Dalcore, a place defined by despair and apathy. Over time, memories are leached out of these trapped spirits until only husks remain. Although this seems a bleak fate, most religions maintain that Dalcore isn't the end of a soul's journey. It is a gateway to whatever lies beyond. They assert that what appears to be dissolution is the natural process of the soul moving to a higher plane of existence that mortals can never realize, joining with the sovereigns, merging with the silver flame, or simply rejoining the cycle of life in a new form. That claim notwithstanding, Dalcore is a gloomy plane filled with the lingering traces of the dead. Dalcore Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. Bodies buried here reanimate in 1d4 days, possessed by restless spirits. These spirits might be malevolent or benign. 2. Any necromancy spell of first level or higher cast within the zone is treated as if it were cast at a level 1 higher than the spell slot that was expended. 3. Spells and abilities that raise the dead have a 50% chance to bring back 1d4 angry spirits as well. These might be banshees, ghosts, shadows, specters, wraiths, or other incorporeal undead. 4. In order to cast a spell of first level or higher in the zone, the caster must succeed on a constitution check with a DC equal to 10 plus the level of the spell. On a failed check, the spell is not cast and its spell slot is not expended, but the action is lost. Fernia, the Sea of Fire. This plane encompasses both the raw elemental power of fire and its versatility. Flame used as a weapon, as a force that holds darkness at bay, or as a destroyer and a force for change. Fernia is home to all manner of fire elementals and to celestials and fiends that embrace the same ideals. Efridi Pashas and fiendish satraps rule city islands of obsidian that drift atop seas of magma, their minions producing metalcraft of surpassing beauty and quality. Fernia Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. Spells that deal fire damage are empowered here. Such a spell of first level or higher cast within the zone deals fire damage, as if it were cast at a level 1 higher than the spell slot that was expended. 2. Weapons and armor with unusual abilities can be forged here, though their enchantments are not always stable. 3. The area is dotted with pools of molten earth and fissures of scalding water, from which mephits and elementals emerge with regularity. 4. Motes of continual flame are spontaneously generated in this region, typically attached to some vegetation or minerals from the area. These flames persist even if they are removed from the region. Irian, the Eternal Dawn. Irian is the plane of light and hope, the wellspring of positive energy, which is the foundation of light, life, and love. The regions of Irian reflect the idea of beginnings and of resurgent life. Fertile lands untouched by any tool, glittering crystal forests, and thriving homesteads and communities. Angels dwell in a grand city, reflecting the first days of a glorious empire. The sun never sets here. Positive energy flows into Eberron from Irian, and the denizens of Irian believe that the simple fact of their existence helps the mortals of the material plane. The Celestials of Irian are also those most likely to respond to Planar Ally and similar spells. Irian Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. The waters of a spring hold curative powers, curing disease, healing wounds, even restoring lost senses. 2. Clusters of radiant crystals sprout from the earth. A spell of first level or higher cast within 30 feet of these crystals, if it restores hit points or deals radiant damage, is treated as if it were cast at a level 1 higher than the spell slot that was expended. 3. A maple tree with translucent, violet-hued bark and shimmering leaves grows in the heart of a swamp. Creatures that live near it age very slowly. 4. Undead within the zone have disadvantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws. Kithri, the Churning Chaos. The plane of chaos and change. Kithri is a realm in constant flux. The elements collide in fantastic explosions of unbridled power. Motes of Earth careen erratically through space as gravity constantly shifts, and a riot of colors blazes through the ever-shifting sky. Still, stoic Githzerai monks exert their will over the elements, crafting monasteries on islands of Earth amid the chaos. Several varieties of Slotty dwell here as well, exulting in the endless turmoil. Kithri Manifest Zone Features. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. The Earth here is highly changeable and unstable. A creature that succeeds on a DC 14 Wisdom, Nature, check as an action can alter a 20 by 20-foot square of terrain in some way. For example, they might choose to turn the Earth to mud, cause stony spikes to erupt from the soil, or warp local plant life. Failing the check causes random, uncontrolled effects. 2. Fabulous formations of precariously balancing rocks dot these badlands. They randomly collapse only to slowly reassemble over the course of days. 3. Packs of Slotty erupt from inside a local cave networks at random intervals, terrorizing travelers. 4. Any spell that deals acid, cold, fire, force, lightning, or thunder damage cast within the zone instead deals one of those damage types determined at random. Lamania, the Twilight Forest. Though it is referred to as a forest, Lamania contains every possible natural environment. It is home to great beasts, lycanthropes, and other beings that reflect the power of nature. The splendor of nature in this place is intoxicating to druids. Animals born here are paragons of their species, infused with primal power that put even the finest specimens of House Vidalis to shame. Lamania Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. Spells that summon elementals are empowered here. Such a spell of first level or higher cast within the zone is treated as if it were cast at a level 1 higher than the spell slot that was expended. 2. The forces of nature work to tear down anything built within the zone. Weather, vegetation, and a rapid rate of decay combine to quickly destroy structures built in the region and overgrow the ruins. 3. The zone is dominated by towering trees and thick undergrowth. Animals come from the surrounding area to live in the zone, where they grow larger and stronger than usual for their species. 4. What appears to be a circle of stones is in truth a group of slumbering earth elementals that came from Lamania during its most recent coterminous period. Mabar, the Endless Night. Mabar is the darkness that promises to swallow even the brightest day, the hungry shadow that yearns to consume light and life. It is the plane of entropy, hunger, and loss, slowly sucking the life from the multiverse. It is the source of negative energy in Eberron. Most undead are animated by the power of Mabar, and the life they drain from mortals flows into the endless night. Mabar is made up of many fragments, each one representing a different vision of desolation. The Fiends of Mabar scheme to steal fragments of other planes and draw them down into their eternal darkness, creating a jumble of broken worlds in varying states of decay. Mabar Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. Undead animated here have 2 extra hit points per hit die, and make saving throws against being turned or frightened with advantage. 2. Vegetation here is sour and stunted, animals are stillborn or deformed, and a malaise hangs in the air. 3. On nights during the month of Cypheros, when the shadow moon is dominant in the sky, horrific monsters stalk the area, prompting residents to leave offerings outside their doors to ward off the evil. 4. The radius of any light source in the zone is halved, and saving throws against necromancy spells are made with disadvantage in the zone. Rija, the Plane of Ice. The counterpoint to Fernia, Rija embodies winter's chill and the stoic constancy of the glacier. Across Rija's icy expanse, blizzards ceaselessly howl over floes of thick, blue ice, and frost giants carve great fortresses from glaciated mountains. unprotected visitors perish quickly, but those who adapt to the cold or protect themselves from it can plumb the plane's frigid depths for ancient secrets. Risha Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. Spells that deal cold damage are empowered here. Such a spell of first level or higher cast within the zone deals cold damage, as if it were cast at a level 1 higher than the spell slot that was expended. 2. Veins of cobalt blue ice run through a glacier in the area. If extracted, this ice maintains its temperature and doesn't melt. An object carved from it can function as a spellcasting focus for spells dealing with water or ice. 3. Abominable yetis lair in a network of bitterly cold, frost-rimed caves in the mountains. 4. Any spell that deals fire damage deals just half the normal damage. Shavirath the Battleground. Shavirath is the plane of war, ravaged by a conflict that will never end. Since the dawn of time, armies of fiends and celestials have fought one another in Shavirath, their eternal battles a microcosm of the struggle between good and evil that rages across all of reality. New arrivals are subject to forced conscription when encountered, whether by angel, demon, or devil, if they aren't summarily dispatched. Amid the constant strife, windstorms of blades scour the landscape, capable of cutting the unprepared to ribbons. For all of its danger, Shavirath holds weapons of legend and a wealth of knowledge on the art of war. Shavirath Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. Blades crafted here have a reputation for being especially fine and sharp. When a creature in the zone scores a critical hit with an attack that deals piercing or slashing damage, the attack deals 1 additional die of damage. 2. Blood spilled here never washes away. Any charisma checks made in the zone to avoid hostility are made with disadvantage. Charisma checks made to encourage violence are always successful. 3. Storms of whirling blades cut the sky during times of combat, randomly attacking the participants. The effect is the same as that of the Cloud of Daggers spell, but the area and the damage might both increase. 4. Devils, demons, and angels duel in the remains of a ruined fortress that serves as a portal to Shavirath. Serenia, the azure sky crystal spires float in a perfect blue sky. Farms and serene communities stretch across clouds. Serenia is the plane of peace and all that flourishes in times of peace. This includes commerce. The immeasurable market of Serenia draws merchants and travelers from across reality. Serenia is home to a host of angels that devote their immortal lives to serene contemplation. Each angel seeks to achieve mastery of one pure concept, such as holding all the knowledge on a subject or ceaselessly abiding by the tenets of a virtue. An angel of dreams isn't a quarry, but it understands dreams, it can explain and interpret them, and it can shape them if it chooses. Likewise, an angel of war isn't constantly embroiled in battle, as the celestials of Shavirath are. Instead, it seeks perfection in the art and theories of war. Angels of Serenia can be useful sources of information for adventurers, and sometimes travel to Eberron to observe mortals. Serenia Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. This zone suppresses all aggressive thought. Any creature that wants to make an attack or cast a damaging spell must succeed on a DC 13 Wisdom saving throw, or it doesn't make the attack or cast the spell, but loses its action. 2. Those with great will and fortitude who ascend a mountain peak in this area can try to bend the weather for miles around to their will, as if they had cast the control weather spell. 3. In this sun-dappled field, children, as well as free-spirited, childlike folk, find themselves able to fly for 1 hour. 4. A village is built into the side of a cliff face here. Windmills protruding from the cliff collect energy from the power of the wind, which is used to operate elevators throughout the community. The Fairy Court. Thelanes is the home of the Fae and a realm where narrative and metaphor shape the nature of reality. Its many dominions are governed by the Archfey, and the denizens of each realm reflect the nature and the story of their lord. For instance, the realm of the Prince of Frost is trapped in endless winter, and pale Eladrin lead packs of winter wolves in their hunts. It's not the same environment as on Rija, because the prince's realm isn't an embodiment of the idea of cold. Rather, it's a domain frozen by its prince's broken heart. If the prince's story were changed, the realm would change with it. Time and space are both malleable in the fairy court, and a mortal who wanders into Thelanies might never return, or might leave after a few days to discover that weeks, months, or years have passed back home. Thelanies Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. Fey trees whose wood is imbued with magical properties grow here, along with a copse of guardian trees and awakened flora. 2. A circle of mushrooms serves as a portal to Thelanies when the proper offering is placed in its center. 3. An Eladrin commune that holds powerful esoteric knowledge is nestled in the depths of a forest inhabited by large numbers of pixies. 4. The magic of the Fey runs deep here. Saving throws against enchantment and illusion spells are made with disadvantage. Zoriat, the Realm of Madness. Zoriat's bizarre geometry and unspeakable inhabitants seem like the product of an insane person's nightmare. In this utterly alien environment, beings whose appearance can shatter a person's sanity live in cities crafted from gargantuan, fleshy tumors. Seas of protoplasm in a shade of purple that hurts the eyes lap against shores of chitin. Some can look upon Zoriat and see it as a place of revelations, but most mortals who come too close to Zoriat fall prey to madness. Zoriat is the source of many aberrations, including the terrifying Dalcore. Zoriat Manifest Zone Features Table. Roll a d4 for a feature. 1. Reality is frayed here. Casting any spell of first level or higher triggers a roll on the Wild Magic Surge table in Chapter 3 of the Player's Handbook. 2. A character must make a DC 14 Charisma saving throw at the end of each hour spent in this place. On a failed save, the character is afflicted with a random form of short-term madness. See Chapter 8 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. 3. Residents of a settlement here display bizarre mutations and unsettling behavior. Visitors who stay too long develop odd characteristics as well. 4. A cavern here is a cancerous tumor that issues forth aberrations to prey upon the world, and it is growing. Eberron and the Multiverse. It is theoretically possible to travel between Eberron and other worlds in the multiverse by means of the deep ethereal or various spells designed for planar travel, but the cosmology of Eberron is specifically designed to prevent such travel, to keep the world hidden away from the meddling of gods, celestials, and fiends from beyond. The three progenitor Williams worked together to form Eberron and its planes as a new cosmic system in the depths of the ethereal plane. They recreated the elves, orcs, dragons, and other races found throughout the multiverse and placed them in their new world, but allowed them to develop beyond the reach of Gruumsh, Corlin, Lolt, and other influences for good and ill. In your campaign, you might decide that the barrier formed by the Ring of Cyberes is intact, and contact between Eberron and the worlds and planes beyond its cosmology is impossible. This is the default assumption of this book. On the other hand, you might want to incorporate elements from other realms. Perhaps you want to use a published adventure that involves Tiamat or the forces of the Abyss meddling in the affairs of the world. In such a case, it could be that the protection offered by the Ring of Cyberes has begun to fail. You might link the weakening of Cyberes to the Morning. Perhaps whatever magical catastrophe caused the Morning also disrupted the Ring of Cyberes, or perhaps a disruption of the Ring of Cyberes actually caused the Morning. If contact between Eberron and the wider multiverse is recent and limited, consider the implications for everyone involved. In the Great Wheel, Asmodeus is an ancient threat with well-established cults, lines of tieflings, and a long history of meddling that sages might uncover in dusty old tomes hidden in remote libraries. But if Asmodeus has only just discovered Eberron and begun to influence it for the first time, there is no lore about him to be discovered on Eberron. He has no power base and needs to recruit new followers. Unusual alliances might form against him, as Celestials and Fiends join forces to expel this hostile outsider. Gods, Celestials, and Fiends. The people of Eberron believe their gods are omnipresent, not bound to a single coherent form, but present in all places. If you revere the silver flame, its power is always with you. The sovereign Onatter guides the hand of every smith who knows how to listen for his voice, and Dal Ara and Dal Dorn are active on every battlefield, guiding every soldier. This outlook means that religion is driven by faith, as opposed to the concrete actions of deities. The faithful believe that their triumphs reflect the assistance of a divine influence. They don't expect a god to physically show up and solve their problems. Fiends and Celestials certainly do have physical form, however. Fortunately for the folk of the material plane, these extraplanar creatures are deeply invested in their own affairs and have little interest in Eberron. Demons and angels battle one another in Shavirath, but they've been doing this since before humanity existed, and they dare not leave their posts to fool around elsewhere. Exceptions do exist, such as the Dalcore and the Dreaming Dark, but by and large these natives of other planes are exclusively concerned with where they live. As such, player characters are more likely to encounter Celestials and Fiends that are native to Eberron, spawned by Kyber or Cyberies, rather than extraplanar entities. Quaddles. Quaddles are a celestial race born from Cyberies at the dawn of time. Along with the dragons, they battled the fiendish overlords of Khorvaire and Sarlona. Ultimately, the Quaddles sacrificed most of their number and combined their souls to form a prison to hold the overlords. Scholars have theorized that their combined souls eventually became the force that is worshipped by the Church of the Silver Flame. The Church is ambivalent on the topic, preaching that regardless of how the flame was first kindled, there is a place within the flame for all noble souls. The few Quaddles that remain on Eberron are devoted servants of the light. They are most often found guarding the prison of the ancient fiendish overlords, and individuals sometimes act directly to aid adventurers who fight the forces of darkness. Fiends. The mightiest of the fiends born from Kyber are creatures of immense power known as the Overlords. Dozens of overlords were imprisoned by the Silver Flame at the dawn of time. Two of them, Rak Tulkesh and Sol Katash, are detailed in Chapter 6. Another, Belshazzar, the Shadow in the Flame, is bound within the Silver Flame itself in the Great Cathedral in Flamekeep in Thrain. You can adapt other evil gods or archfiends for an Eberron campaign, assuming you don't want Eberron to be connected to the wider multiverse by recasting them as overlords. For example, Tiamat could be an overlord embodying the pride and potential for evil within dragons. Lult could be an overlord who preys on the elves, and Asmodeus the insidious maker of profane bargains. Any fiend, whether devil, demon, Yugoloth, or something else, could be spawned by Kyber if it suits your story. Such fiends might be bound to an overlord, or they might be independent incarnations of evil unleashed on the world. Two other races of fiends, though, play important roles in its history. Night Hags. Night Hags have been around since the Age of Demons, when they often served as ambassadors and carried messages between the fiends and the dragons. Today, they remain impartial mediators and adventurers who are about to deal with outsiders or other planes of existence might want to seek the advice of a Night Hag, although one can be quite difficult to find. Rakshasas. As the primary agents of the fiendish overlords, Rakshasas once dominated Khorvaire and Sarlona. When the overlords were defeated in the first age of the world by the combined might of the dragons and the Quaddles, the Rakshasas largely disappeared into Kyber as well. The Lords of Dust are made up largely of Rakshasas, scheming in the shadows. many trying to free their imprisoned overlords, others looking for a way to claim their master's power for their own. Travel thanks to the industrious innovation of multiple dragon-marked houses and workshops full of mage rights. The people of Corvair can cross the continent in a week or less using magical means. The lightning rail and vessels, powered by bound elementals and operated by the dragon-marked houses, can carry passengers as far in an hour as a horse can walk in a day. This section discusses issues related to travel in an Eberron campaign and presents the Gold Dragon Inns, a chain of hotels that offer consistent accommodation for travelers anywhere in Corvair. As described in Chapter 5 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, it's up to you whether you gloss over travel in your campaign or narrate it in more detail. If the point is to get the characters to their destination so they can get the adventure underway, it's fine to assume that their journey, whether it's by lightning rail, airship, or more mundane means, passes without incident. After all, the people of Corvair make such trips every day, and most of them reach their destinations safely. The alternative is to make the journey an important part of the adventure. Travel can play a crucial role in a story, and when it does, you should give it as much time at the game table as it needs. Elemental vessels. Long ago, no artificers and specialists from House Cannith discovered and developed a means of magical travel. The heart of the process is a set of techniques for binding elementals that uses kyber dragon shards. This closely guarded procedure requires delicate engineering, arcane skill, and rare materials from around the world, and different workshops employ varying esoteric techniques. Building a new vehicle can occupy a workshop for months while magical energy is painstakingly inlaid into the vessel's hull. Such work is a complicated task requiring the labor of many. It is not something that can be undertaken by a lone wizard for any amount of compensation. The construction of elemental vessels requires the use of two kinds of dragon shards. A kyber dragon shard of the largest size and finest quality is required to bind the elemental to the vessel, and a Cyberese dragon shard is needed to craft the vehicle's helm. Production of new vessels grinds to a halt without a steady supply of both kinds of dragon shards, and a workshop with an order to fill will pay a handsome fee to adventurers who can find them. Elemental matrix. Every elemental vessel is imbued with an invisible, arcane matrix. This magical essence extends from the containment chamber at the core of the vehicle to the binding struts, then through the rest of the vehicle's hull. When a kyber dragon shard holding a bound elemental is placed in the containment chamber, the matrix comes alive. The unsuppressed elemental emerges from the shard and flows along the matrix in the way that blood moves through the arteries and veins of a living creature. The binding struts force the elemental into a ring shape and give every elemental vessel its distinctive appearance. From there, the elemental continues to flow along the matrix through the hull, appearing as jagged, snaking lines of living energy that pulse and shift. These conduits of elemental energy take on an appearance associated with the type of elemental bound into the vessel. A fire elemental, for example, sends tendrils of flame along the hull of its ship. At the command of the vehicle's dragon-marked pilot, the bound elemental can be suppressed, causing its essence to flow back into the containment chamber and the matrix to disappear from view. A vehicle whose elemental is suppressed ceases to be propelled. Controlling the elemental. Piloting an elemental vessel requires effective communication between the pilot and the bound elemental. The elemental controls the vehicle's movement, and everything from basic propulsion to delicate maneuvering is dependent on the ability of the pilot to control the elemental. If the elemental is uncontrolled and not suppressed, the vehicle moves according to the elemental's whim until a pilot asserts control again. A dragon-marked heir at the helm of a vessel can command the elemental easily. Without such a pilot, it's very difficult to control the vessel. A character who is touching either the kyber dragon shard where the bound elemental is housed or the magic item at the vessel's helm can try to communicate with the elemental, but with no guarantee of success. A character can make a DC 20 Charisma, Persuasion, or Intimidation check to persuade the elemental to cooperate or demand its obedience. On a successful check, the elemental obeys the character for 1 minute. The Dominate Monster spell can also enable a character without a dragon mark to control an elemental vessel, even wresting control away from a dragon-marked pilot. The Charm Monster spell, found in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, also makes the elemental compliant to the caster's wishes, but the elemental remains obedient to the commands of a dragon-marked pilot at the helm. Freeing the elemental. Shattering the Kyber dragon shard that binds it can free an elemental, preventing the vehicle from moving. On most elemental vessels, the shard is sealed in a protective metal chest with 10, 3d6 hit points, usually made of iron, AC 19, but sometimes of mithril, AC 21, or adamantine, AC 23. The chest is often guarded with a glyph of warding and housed in a room behind locked and possibly trapped doors. The shard itself has AC 17 and 10, 3d6 hit points. Lyrander Airship. The Airship is the most advanced elemental-powered vehicle on Eberron, the pride of House Lyrander, and the forerunner of the magical advances that many hope will become commonplace in the aftermath of the last war. The first airships emerged from the Cannith and Zalargo workshops and appeared in House Lyrander's service just 8 years ago, in 990 IC. For now, though, they remain rare because the sorewood required for their construction is exceedingly scarce and tightly controlled. Sorewood is a form of buoyant timber found only on the island of Irian, and the elves who live there limit their annual harvest of the precious wood. As a result, production of new airships proceeds at a snail's pace, unable to satisfy the fervent demand for new vessels. The discovery of a new supply of sorewood could literally change the world, and even convincing the elves of Irian to part with more of it would be an achievement worth a handsome reward from House Lyrander. How it works. A standard airship, at least as far as standards have been defined for this relatively new creation, looks similar to an ocean-going ship, but is rigged with control fins and rudders rather than sails. An air or fire elemental is bound into a ring around the hull, which is suspended on 4 struts jutting outward. Most airships are outfitted with the finest amenities, including many decorative flourishes and creature comforts. Operation. A dragon-marked heir of House Lyrander must pilot a Lyrander airship, channeling the power of the Mark of Storm through the wheel of wind and water that controls the vessel. The helm is typically situated near the rear of the ship, inside the shelter of a wheelhouse. Controlling the vessel, without the benefit of something like the conductor stones that dictate a lightning rail route, requires constant attention, so at least 2 pilots typically travel on every journey. Only a dragon-mark heir with the Mark of Storm can use the wheel and command the bound elemental. House Lyrander pilots train for months to gain a deep understanding of the ship's powers and limitations. Because of this training, a skilled pilot can execute acrobatic maneuvers in the sky. Airships can move in all 3 dimensions, with or without the aid of the wind. Unlike most flying creatures, they don't rely on wings for lift thanks to their sorewood hulls. They are able to fly equally well on their sides, or even upside down, notwithstanding the risks that such maneuvers present to passengers and crew. Airships cannot actually land because the struts that hold the elemental ring in place protrude 10 feet from the bottom of the vessel. Thus, passengers and cargo are lifted in elevators and loaded at towers in major cities. Each ship carries rope ladders for use at smaller stations, in open terrain, or in cases of dire emergency. A typical airship can reach a speed of 20 miles per hour in clear skies, carrying up to 30 tons of cargo. Airships are most often employed by explorers and by wealthy travelers who demand luxury, clients who have a need to move quickly to places that might not be served by the lightning rail. Suppression. Although the elemental bound to the airship is essential for propulsion, The vessel's sorwood hull provides its lighter-than-air buoyancy. When the elemental is suppressed, the ship remains aloft but can't move. The pilot always suppresses the elemental before docking, then uses ropes to maneuver the vessel into position. Lyrander Galleons. A house Lyrander galleon, also called an elemental galleon, resembles a Lyrander airship, except that it has a water elemental ring that propels it across oceans and seas instead of through the air. This vessel has a speed of 10 miles per hour, but otherwise is similar to a Lyrander airship. Orion Lightning Rail. The wondrous lightning rail system once linked the far reaches of the Kingdom of Galifar prior to the last war. Now the system is divided, split into eastern and western circuits. Re-establishing the conductor stone paths across Sion's Sound and the Mornland is often discussed in the halls of power in the Five Nations, but formidable challenges are involved. How it works. A lightning rail train is made up of an elemental vessel linked to a series of connected carts, all of which float about 5 feet off the ground. Each cart, similar in form to a large wagon with no wheels, has a conductor stone embedded in its underside. A corresponding set of conductor stones laid out in a line on the ground interacts with the stones in the carts to form a rail for the train to follow. Lightning arcs between the two sets of stones, accounting for the system's name. The elemental vessel at the front of the train, called a crew cart, holds a bound air elemental that propels the train along its route at a speed of about 30 miles per hour. The elemental appears as a ring of lightning encircling the crew cart while the train is in motion. A bound air elemental can move a train of up to 10 carts without obvious strain, and most trains are configured accordingly. The other carts that make up the train have various purposes. A typical train has a crew cart at each end, with 2 cargo carts, 4 passenger carts, and 2 lounge carts in between. Doors at both ends of each cart enable crew and passengers to walk from one to the next, even while the train is in motion. Both crew carts are identical, except that the bound elemental in one is suppressed. On the return trip, the roles of the carts and the states of their elementals are reversed. Specialized carts of other sorts vary in configuration depending on their purpose and the degree of luxury afforded to them. Some have solid sides and roofs, while others are covered only with canvas. Map 4.10 shows the different carts that comprise most lightning rail trains. Operation. The vessel's pilot, a House Orion Dragon-marked heir, stands at the helm, high atop the crew cart, beneath the elemental binding struts. The pilot controls the elemental and communicates with it during the trip, watching the path ahead through broad windows that encircle the helm platform. The placement of conductor stone lines dictates where a lightning rail train can travel, but the pilot still must make operational decisions as the coach moves from one city to the next. The pilot controls the vessel's speed based on conditions around the train. When conductor stone lines split, as they do at various hubs along the way, the pilot selects the intended route and directs the elemental down the correct line. The crew of a train includes a handful of chief stewards overseeing a number of lesser stewards who are charged with seeing to the needs of passengers and keeping cargo secured. Lightning rail stations. Lightning rail stations, where passengers and cargo can be disembarked or loaded, are located in or just outside villages, towns, and cities along the conductor stone paths. There are no stations in the expanses between these settlements, and House Orion rules prohibit lightning rail pilots from stopping anywhere but at a station. Stations throughout Corvair have a similar look and feel to ensure that each one lives up to the high expectations of House Orion's patrons. White and gold Everbright lanterns continually illuminate each station. When a train pulls into the station, loading ramps are moved into position beside each cargo cart and stairs by each passenger cart. The cargo is unloaded from one side of the train and the passengers from the other. Individual stations do have distinct touches that reflect local features. For example, the station in Gatherhold in the Talenta Plains, is decorated with traditional halfling motifs and offers specialized stables for travelers leaving their dinosaurs behind. On a larger scale, the station at Passage, which is the seat of power for House Irian, is a multi-storied structure designed as a monument to the majesty and storied history of the house. Mysterious passengers. Lightning rails and airships are good places to encounter a broad sample of Corvair's diverse population. You can use the Mysterious Passengers table to bring curious characters in contact with an adventuring party on any kind of journey. Each of these characters might spark an entire new adventure, or might be little more than a momentary diversion. Determine details about these travelers and the stories behind them, as you see fit. Mysterious Passengers Table. Roll a D100 to determine passenger. 01-02. A human merchant of obvious means seems to be deliberately drawing attention, loudly calling out their name and the time of day. 0304. Two shifters drinking and spoiling for a fight. 0506. A Warforged quietly reads a book called The Machine Manifesto. 0708. A half-elf sits down, says, "Beware, the wolf howls at midnight," and leaves without further comment. 09-10. A gnome watches everyone carefully, writing down observations in a tiny orange book. 11-12. A one-armed Brellish veteran verbally assaults any Warforged he sees, blaming them for his injury. 13-14. A well-dressed human sits awkwardly next to the wall, seemingly trying to avoid touching or being touched by anyone else. 15-16. A cloaked figure moves slowly past, pausing briefly upon catching sight of the party. 17-18. An acolyte of the Silver Flame preaches loudly in an attempt to convert an essentially captive audience. 19-20. A destitute bard plays the harp with mediocre skill while asking for donations. 21-22. A deaf couple communicate with each other by sign language, but suddenly stop when they notice they are being watched. 23-24. A frail human with a small strongbox shackled to one of her wrists is in the company of two heavily armed half-orc bodyguards. 25-26. Three hobgoblin mercenaries from House Denith discuss their plans in their native tongue. 27-28. A harried dwarf tries to keep three children corralled, but the oldest one keeps sneaking away. 29-30. A bored changeling practices duplicating the faces of the guests. Not all of them are amused. 31-32. A shifter glowers in a corner booth, looking angry at the world. 33-34. A Warforged bard uses its body as a percussion instrument to entertain the patrons. 35-36. A dog with no apparent owner wanders around. 37-38. Two Kanathi soldiers seem extremely nervous and speak to no one. 39-40. A halfling leads a tiny pet dinosaur on a leash, tugging at it whenever it tries to examine something. 41-42. A half-orc sits with a small potted plant, whispering to it in orc. 43-44. A well-dressed dwarf wearing 8 copper rings paces restlessly. 45-46. A halfling from House Galanda offers food and drink to all passengers except elves or half-elves. 47-48. An elf bard from House Fireland whispers conspiratorially with a member of the vehicle's crew. 49-50. A Kalister is trying too hard to pass as human, conspicuously and awkwardly using human slang. 51-52. A young half-elf in adventuring garb weeps openly. 53-54. A silver dragon in human form observes the interactions of the clientele, paying close attention to any dragon-marked characters. 55-56. A House Cannith tinker examines the structure of the vehicle closely, looking concerned and asking questions about possible escape procedures. 57-58. A one-eyed human, actually an inspired agent of the Dreaming Dark, watches everyone carefully. 59-60. A disheveled human magerite offers meager magical skills in return for food or spare coins. 61-62. A warforged leaning on a wooden staff carries on a conversation with the docent attached to its chest. 63-64. A human pickpocket circulates among the passengers, looking for another victim. 65-66. A human from Onder obsessively checks and rechecks their traveling papers. 67-68. An artificer tinkers with a new invention. 69-70. An attractive half-elf makes advances toward a number of other passengers. 71-72. An apprentice wizard draws arcane symbols on the window, glaring at anyone who interrupts. 73-74. A dwarf with a bandaged wound checks it repeatedly, occasionally pouring whiskey on it and wincing. 75-76. A young, red-haired human flirtatiously tries to get other passengers to buy drinks. 77-78. An Irian elf sits silently, trying to ignore the stares of other passengers. 79-80. A disheveled old human loudly proclaims that the end of the world is nigh, according to the dragons. 81-82. A human child is apparently traveling with no parent or guardian. 83-84. A nervous goblin holds traveling papers out to anyone passing by, as if expecting to be challenged at any moment. 85-86. 4 Kalister monks meditate, burning incense and chanting quietly. 87-88. A rogue tries to swindle other passengers by using marked cards. 89-90. A house Tharashk inquisitive examines the floor of the vessel very carefully, offering no explanation. 91-92. A group of unremarkable farmers are transporting a strange device that bears draconic runes. 93-94. A cleric of the sovereign host seems annoyed and is rude to several pious passengers who ask for blessings. 95-96. An older human reads the Korenberg Chronicle, loudly proclaiming outrage at every story. 97-98. Roll again. The travelers are one or more changelings appearing to be whatever the second roll indicates. 99-00. Roll twice more. The 2 travelers indicated are about to come to a very obvious conflict of some kind, verbal or physical. Gold Dragon Inns. Travelers and explorers making their way across Corvair, especially in out-of-the-way areas, often find themselves in need of a safe place to spend the night. Thanks to the efforts of House Galanda, there's no better place to take a rest than at one of the hundreds of Gold Dragon Inns that the house operates. Every city, most towns, and even some villages have a Gold Dragon Inn, and a large city might boast several. Every major road through the countryside has Gold Dragon Inns along much of its length, spaced roughly a day's travel apart. Sometimes an inn is the nucleus of a small community whose industry is focused on providing for the needs of travelers. A few Gold Dragon Inns are found in locations that offer no other comforts for the weary traveler, for example, high in a pass through the Bayeshk Mountains, deep in the Canwood, or beneath the surface of the Emror Holds. In features and amenities, every Gold Dragon Inn provides a standard menu of reliable services at reasonable rates. Prices are fixed, equal to those given in Chapter 5 of the Player's Handbook, and the quality of services is reliably modest, with some comfortable upgrades available. Every inn uses one of a small number of possible floor plans, and every inn's restaurant offers the same menu. The size and number of guest rooms can vary from inn to inn. A small roadside inn has 4 rooms and a moderately sized common room, while a thriving inn in a large city has 40 rooms, a restaurant, and a separate common room, with 2 stages for entertainment. Because the inns are owned by House Galanda, the buildings all include accommodations for halfling-sized guests as well as taller folk. Because travelers often carry valuables with them, Each inn has a heavy strong box secured with an arcane lock spell. To make a traveler's stay more enjoyable, perhaps even memorable, House Galanda has arranged with House Thyrany and House Fireland to employ guild-licensed entertainers at almost every Gold Dragon Inn. To populate an inn with some distinctive individuals, you can use the mysterious passengers table. Inn attractions. The Inn Attractions table offers some ideas for unique twists on an inn's character or atmosphere. Inn attractions. Roll a d6 for an attraction. 1. The bartender is a changeling who is always mimicking the patrons for a laugh. 2. The innkeeper is 7 feet tall, claiming to have grown 2 feet after venturing into the mist of the Mornland. 3. Rumor has it that the innkeeper here is a gold dragon cloaked in a humanoid guise. 4. This inn is haunted by a ghost who loves to sit by the fireplace and tell stories, but it has been accused of more sinister activities once the fire burns down to embers and the guests are in their beds. 5. The inn has a blink dog that wanders around with her 5 pups, all of them eager for attention and treats. 6. This inn offers the true talented experience. The halfling family that runs it keeps pet dinosaurs,